Hello and welcome to the next edition of Lights on Europe. Today we speak to Nikita Stampa, who used to be my boss when we worked on public procurement reforms in Slovakia and Central Europe. However, this edition is not only about his career, it's mainly about the walk. The walk that he embarked on to cross Europe all the way to Jerusalem without credit card or any other resources. The walk that changed his life, that taught him to work with his own courage, to listen to the inner voice, to be comfortable with silence, and also a walk that gave him inspiration to change his career and create a completely different kind of job. You may also learn a lot about his engagement with Belgian youth and maybe be inspired if you feel like the education of today doesn't really fulfill the needs of the future. Hello Nikita, welcome to our podcast.
Hello Lucia.
You used to be my boss, and I always say that I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity that we could have worked together, because you're also very popular here in the institutions. And so thank you very much for coming on the podcast and sharing a little bit about your journey here in Brussels and European institutions.
Thank you very much. I think it's really a great idea what you're doing, and I'm very happy to contribute and participate.
Thank you. So let's go in medias res into our experience of working together. I was one of the people on your team when we used to work together on policy for public procurement, which is a very hardcore regulatory legalistic job, and it was very interesting. But one day you appeared with this idea, or rather an announcement, that you will leave us for a couple of months and go on a sabbatical break to reflect a little bit more about, I guess, your life and career in Europe. So let's look at what was this idea, where did it come from, why did you do this, what was it as an experience?
Well, actually it was a walk, or I could even say a pilgrimage. And the whole story started in actually 2011, where I decided that I would engage in a long walk. I mean, my dream had always been to do that in one go, to go to Santiago de Compostela in one go, but then having a family, having a job, it was not possible. But one day I decided I will just do a week, and then I will start from there and do another week the year after, and so on. So I started in 2011 with the idea of going to Santiago, but after just 10 kilometers of walk, I met somebody that I knew actually. He was from a village nearby, and we had a conversation, and after that conversation he gave me a book, and he said, you have to read that book, and he put it in my bag. And a few kilometers later I opened the book, and the book was À pied à Jérusalem, meaning the story of a guy who had gone to Jerusalem. And when I saw and I read that book, I said, but actually that's what I'm doing. I'm not going to Santiago as I initially thought. It's a project of my life. I will just go to Jerusalem.
I remember when I first visited you in your office, you have, as many of us have, maps of Europe on our walls, and you had these little post-its marking the parts of the walk that you've already done. And as many people, I guess I also had the reflex, is this part of the Santiago path, because that's what most of the people are doing. And for most of the people it was really incomprehensible. Why would you choose Jerusalem? Is this a religious calling, or is this simply because it's not a similar cliche to what many people see behind the Santiago paths? So why do you think this concept of Jerusalem was such a strong calling for you?
That's a very interesting question, and not easy to answer, actually. Well, the first is the one I told you about, this book that came and really struck me deeply, and I say, yes, that's what I want to do. Indeed, there is this aspect that Santiago, there is so many people going already doing, although that's a nice part of it, is you meet so many people. But I also wanted something maybe more lonely, a bit more, hors des sentiers battus, as we say in French.
Which means in English?
Well, off the beaten track, I would say, a bit off the beaten track. And then it's true there is more, I wouldn't say religious, but spiritual reason, which has to do with my childhood. When I was a child, I had this admiration for Jesus. And it's also something maybe incomprehensible. It was there, it has always been there. And when I read the book, I say, well, maybe it makes sense for me. Also, this place culturally is very much charged with all these different religion being there in Jerusalem. I don't know, but definitely the link with the Christ was something that was also calling. Without being religious, it was something that was attracting me. Then I did the first walk was a week in 2011. I did another week in 2012. Then I took 15 days, then 3 weeks, and I arrived at the beginning of the Alps. I think it was 2015, which was the year my father died. And my father was from Italian origin, and I was just starting crossing Italy, going to the south to go there to take the boat to Greece. That was the plan, to take a few months. And I then thought that I had to do something special for the death of my father, and I say something special would be taking these 3 months of CCP and crossing all Italy in one go.
CCP being the eurocrat dish for sabbatical break.
Sabbatical break, sorry, yes, of course. So I took this break, and then I had a bit of a crazy idea to it, which was also stemming from that book. That guy had gone to Jerusalem with no money in his pocket, basically 50 euros, something like that. And it was just going and trusting that people would feed him, they would welcome him to, or give him place to stay and so on. So I decided to do the same, it was one big, I would say, exercise to learn trust. I decided to do that, and I will always remember the first day I was there in the mountain with no money in my pocket, no food in my backpack, and I said, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know if I will find a place tonight to stay, if I will find food, but I will and I was dead scared, of course, the first time.
I still remember the day when we had our picnic. It was June of that year, when we were trying to somehow equip you for the journey, and we bought you like this kit and the sleeping bag and God knows what, and you're like, but I'm gonna have to carry this on my own, like I'm not gonna take this with me. Plus, I'm not even gonna take my credit card, and I'm gonna just take like a little old phone, you said, to stay in touch with your wife and family. But it's not like you would embark on this like high-tech 3 months expedition.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, how was it on a daily basis, like really facing all these the fears and the practical challenges and the logistics of it? How did your days look?
Actually, it went much easier than in 3 months I slept one night outside. It was in the mountain in France, and there was only one shelter. The weather was beautiful, and I asked the guy, and he said, no, if you are not registered, I don't know, if you have no money, you cannot stay. So I had to stay outside. That was the only time. Otherwise, I always found throughout Italy a place to stay at night. And food, I can tell you, I really understood that food is really the soul of Italy, and people are so nice, happy to share food with you. They go in their garden, they bring you tomato. I probably ate more tomato in 3 months than in 50 years before, but never mind, they are delicious Italian tomato. And when you are hungry, you just take what you are given. And
was it difficult to start asking at the beginning? I guess it must have taken a little bit of personality work
to
in
the beginning,
approach people with these strange requests and explain who you are and why are you asking them for their help.
But you don't go straight. Usually you start talking to people, they are curious, you go in villages, and then you start explaining, and then a kind of trust established, and you explain maybe that what you need. And it eventually became quite natural, actually. Although it's true that in Italy, there was a word that I didn't know, which was like really a magic key that they have this concept in Italy of divina providencia, which is the divine providence. I don't know what would be and because sometimes somebody told me, so you are traveling under the sponsorship, I don't know how to say that in English, of the Divina Providencia. I say, yes, that's it, that's a way of saying it. And then I was explaining that to everybody I would meet, and they would understand right away. I didn't need any long explanation. I was just saying Divina Providencia, and then people will just open their arms, their house, and it would be so easy to get a connection. So it was really, really a wonderful life-changing experience to to cross Italy like that. Unfortunately, I had planned to arrive in Greece, in Mount Athos that year, but I had problem with my knee. I eventually had to stay. I ended up staying a week in a monastery without money. You know, there was some place at some stage. I was in a village. I could not move anymore because my knee was too painful. And I met some people that lent me an apartment because their daughter had gone, and I stayed in that apartment for 5 days, and they would bring me food every day. I mean, things you cannot believe.
So far, it sounds super optimistic and easy to do.
Yes.
Share a little bit more. What were the challenges or the highs and lows on the journey? What is it that created a transformative journey out of it?
Well, the transformative is all these connection, this relation, the fact of daring, the fact of all that, and also the time you spend in silence about yourself, knowing yourself, and so on. But of course, there is one thing, and that is very much connected to work, that changed in a way my professional life, is in meeting all these people through villages of Italy, hundreds of them, sometimes with whom I had a very deep conversation, and there was not a single one that had positive words for the EU, for Europe. And in general, that was mainly disappointment. People were disappointed about Europe. And that was so painful, because you can hear it once, you can hear it twice, but if you hear it all the journey, and you are like myself, somebody who's deeply convicted, deeply involved in Europe, and really believing in that how important that project is now, it's becoming more obvious for everybody, but that has, since my childhood, is there in me, that really believing in European value, in the European peace project. So when you are there in Italy, in the founding member states, meeting all these people who were disappointed about Europe, that was so striking for me, that when I came back, I said, I cannot come back to my office as if I hadn't seen that. Because of course we hear in Europe, people are, there Euroscepticism, people are maybe critical here and there, but that's a different experience when you experience it directly, like this. So it was deep sadness, and it really triggered some reaction. Of course, I was not to save Europe and to recover, the trust of Italians, but I said I have to do something at my level. So I started thinking with you colleagues. We thought about how engage differently with member states. What can we do in general with stakeholders, among ourselves, how we can work. And I took a coach. I discussed that. I had a coach, but then we really looked at this in depth. What can be done differently? And she gave me an article from called "From Business to Impact" from Harvard Business Review, which I found quite interesting, which was really about leadership and purpose. That if you have to, in order to be a leader, you have to have a clear idea of what is your purpose as an individual, but of course in an institution like ours, that we are driven by a purpose. And I thought that was an interesting way, this reflection was an interesting way to help leaders in the institution to reconnect with what they are here for. And because my feeling is that one way of overcoming this skepticism is to have true leadership at all levels of the institution. We know the political level through the television and so on, the papers. But a lot of Europe is happening in these encounters, numerous encounters we have with our counterpart in the member states, with the civil society in member states and so on. So the way you interact with them is crucial. One of the ideas that came into my mind with a colleague, we were discussing with a colleague about what we could do and so on, was the idea to take, because that was my experience and I saw the power of walking. I said, let's go and walk together with other managers and think about purpose, our own purpose and the purpose of Europe, and what we could do to bring that more in our job. And then I met many people, I tested the idea. Some people said you are completely crazy, others were over enthusiastic. But at the end I arrived here at the European School of Administration, and I met the director, Anna Smedeby, and proposed her. I say, I want to pilot this. Would you be interested to pilot it with to put it in the catalog so that managers could...
And so European School of Administration is a service within European institutions which provides us, people working in the institutions, with training on all kinds of subjects. So typically it can be hard skills like using new software on computers, through policy making procedures, all the way to all kinds of funky stuff and soft skills. So I guess...
there is the soft skills, there is the management, there's really a focus on management in the school. That's really one of the core business. Then there's something which is a bit more technical, it's called certification. I will not enter into that. But of course, one of the core things is really management and leadership. And that's where there was an interest that they would say, yeah, why not? Let's try. So we tried. But as you say, I was still a head of unit, but that was also seen very positively by the participant as really a peer. It's peers that we discuss among peers. It's not an external consultant that comes and talk about although I have nothing against external consultant, they can certainly add a lot of value. But here it was really this idea of let's think together, we walk together, we think together about what we could do differently, and also very concretely. So it starts with some kind of deeper introspection, and the walk is very useful for that. It really creates a special atmosphere among people, but also for personal introspection. So we bring them through a number of exercise, and including creativity, walk, silence, and so on, towards clarifying really what's their purpose and how that relates with European purpose.
And it takes a couple of days. It's somewhere in Belgium. You as a Belgian, you have a special understanding of which are the nicer places.
It's on the Santiago. It's on the path to Santiago. We thought with Nathalie, who is the person with whom I designed the course, that doing it on the Santiago de Compostela path would be symbolic and would have a lot of value. So we did that. It's only part of the path, but of the way that is on the path, but still, that's how we did it. So the first, it was really a success. The pilot was a success. We got great feedback from the participant. So Anna told me, but why don't you then do more next year? And I say, but well, okay, I have my other job. I would love to do that. But it's not sure. My hierarchy and also my team needs me for other things. So, and then the coincidence, or how you call it, that there was a post open in the school 3 months after. So I rang back Anna. I say, I'm ready to step down as a head of unit and come to work in the school to develop that project, that concept. And she said, yes, of course, apply, and then let's hope you get the job. And that's how it came. It's a bit unusual to step down. You know, many people, they strive to become a head of unit, including myself. It was important in my career to become a head of unit. But there, I can tell you, I had zero doubt. Zero doubt. There is really, when you feel it.
Once you know, you know.
Yes. I when she said it's possible, and if you come, let's develop this, I had zero doubt. I think this is the place where I have to be. So
what's your new job about? It's not only about the walks. Walks are a piece of a bigger puzzle that you're trying to build as a new leadership education program here for the management in the institutions.
Yeah, of course, the first part and the big part is really to scale up these walking seminars, not only for managers, but for everybody, administrators and so on, having it kind of a practice for people who are interested in that, who have some kind of leadership interest, to think about what is their personal purpose and how they link it with European purpose and how they can bring that into their job in a very concrete way. It's really about, there is a dimension of dreaming about how, if you live your life purpose, what will be your life, but how you can get there, but also very concretely what you can do in the weeks to come but first this clarification, which is very important, that you know where you want to go. This is key, because that's also where you can have an impact on people, on interacting with people, on leading a team. You really have to have this kind of clear compass. And of course, this compass has to be as much as aligned as possible on the Europe's values and even direction. So all this work it really makes sense to do that among colleagues. The idea, and we are starting that now, is to meet regularly as a small group to say, okay, how am I doing in my job in doing that? What are the constraints? So to make also co-development groups. So all this idea of coaching together oneself with colleagues, peer learning and so on, we think it's key. So that's part of the job. But in Lead, as you say, is a bigger picture. I'm here to work on leadership in general, and it's a nice moment because we are at the school thinking about the plan, the new program for the years to come, and what should be there in leadership. And there, I mean, we are in this phase that we want to do that also in a participatory, involving a lot of people from different horizon in thinking, but definitely already there is a bit this shift from management to leadership, it's more than management. And leadership doesn't mean, the heroic leader individual. That's not what we have in mind. Leadership is very much about bottom-up leadership, leaving space for others, about collective intelligence, all those aspects of leadership. So we want to look at them, and there has been a lot of evolution over the last years about this, and also finding innovative way of delivering, if you want, the learning experience. And of course the walk is one innovative way. There are others. We have now just done an innovation boot camps for people to reflect in teams how to innovate, how to do public service innovations. We will all these co-development, coaching, peer learnings, all those different ways we want to explore, and that's part of my job today, about designing together with other colleagues, designing this program for the future.
To which degree are you drawing inspiration from the national administrations? Because also during the period when we were working on public procurement reforms, those are super closely related to reform of national administrations. Mm-hmm. So from that period, all of them, and you have your impressions or feeling for which countries operate in a better or less better or more efficient or not way. Are there some member states who serve as an interesting inspiration for you in this regard, or it's very different?
Well, I certainly, the Nordic countries in general very often have advanced approaches. I also had a very interesting contact with the French administration on that. I think there is a lot happening in many member states. There are islands of innovation. There are countries where it's more systematic, but there are islands of innovation in a bit everywhere. And actually, I had the opportunity. You remember, we worked on Slovakia together, and we had part of our project was of the responsibility of the unit was to manage the policy on public procurement in Slovakia.
What are your memories of Slovakia?
Great, you remember we
used to travel there a lot and have good fun.
I loved it. I really loved it.
Well, public procurement is seen as one of
it's very
more complicated areas of policy.
And precisely there is this. There has been a problem of trust. When trust is broken. And that's the situation in that country, that there has been a lot in many countries on public procurement. But I remember very well that working with the Public Procurement Authority, there was this wind of reforms. We had the opportunity to work with all the team there of the Public Procurement Authority that precisely had this idea of a much more decentralized system, much more with a real vision, and precisely trust, bringing back trust. I remember by then he was, I think, Deputy Mr. Pellegrini. He
now
was
Prime Minister.
Now Prime Minister. He made a speech, and and he said, of course, you have all these problematic, but we have to realize that the majority of people that are working in these are honest people that want good outcome for their countries.
And through all this policy work that you've been doing, now you land a job in the School of Administration when you're transforming the leadership of the institutions. And at the same time, you find so much time to really work on day-to-day basis with kids of Belgium. And somehow it's very similar. I don't know if it's similar to the walks, but you also have some programs for them which are about silence and meditation and nature. So what is this work that you're trying to do here?
And walking, of course.
And walking, of course.
There's walk everywhere. First, it's not day-to-day work. I have a lot of day-to-day work in my job, but during holidays and so on, with a number of friends, we have decided to engage in this kind of educational program for young, from 12 to 30 years old, so it's not that young, and reflecting and helping, maybe filling a gap that there is in the educational system, which is really about helping people to know themselves. You know, there is a sentence from Socrates, base of European philosophy, saying, know yourself and you will know the gods and the universe, something like that. So the knowing yourself is not just knowing your little selfish, who am I? It's a much deeper question. And we are helping through a number of very practical, helping the young people know the body through using martial arts in particular, knowing the heart, knowing who they are from their heart, the emotional part, the artistic part, and from a spiritual, philosophical point of view, knowing better. We live in a very materialistic world, and creating opening through better understanding of the sacred scriptures, mythology, and so on. What are they talking about? But in a very experiential way. So indeed, using meditation, using the walk, pilgrimage, using, as I said, martial arts, and so on. So and also reintroducing this idea of initiation. I don't know how you say it. You know, when in primitive society, there was this idea that the youngster, when they reach a certain age, they would go and have they would go outside the village and do some kind of challenges and so on. So here we invite people, we propose to these young people to spend 3 to 5 days completely alone in the nature, with little food, just a bit of water, and just reflect and being, because fear is the biggest limitation to human beings. So then helping young people from the start to not to be fearless, but to cope with fear, to say, okay, of course, if I'm staying alone in the forest during 5 days in the night and so on, of course I will have fear in myself, but it's not the fear that's going to decide where I'm going. I'm going to stand. There is fear and there is me. And learning how to deal with fear is something so crucial that would then help, because if you look at what drives very often, even professional relation, fear is very, very often present. And how you can deal with your own fear, it's actually, it's a huge step towards freedom, because fear is what, more than anything else outside the world, it's fear that is locking yourself and affecting your freedom. So we do a lot, of course, reasonably with them to help them to live with fear and overcome it.
This is so fascinating. It makes me think, how can you roll this out to all schools in Europe, really? Yeah, that's one of the disadvantages of the fact that we don't really have too much competence in education policy. But do you have some kind of a vision of bringing it to the schools of Belgium, or it's more of a weekend, holidays kind of activity?
No, indeed there is and we have already started that. One of the idea would be to have the young people that are 20, 30, working with those that are 12, 16, and we're starting that. We do camps over the summer, and now we start, scaling it up with other young people that have gone through the system that themselves do it for young people. Yeah, but I think when we do that, we won't be the only one. There are other people that do similar things. I think this thing will more and more mushroom, but of course it would make sense to have part of these things in the school system.
One last thing that I would like to ask you about is the concept of silence. You mentioned it was a big part of your walk. It's also part of the programs that you do with the kids. It's something that we don't have enough of in our everyday lives, and the first thing we do when there's a couple of minutes of freedom or non-activity that we have is we reach for the phone, or we start basically binging on whatever we can with our technology, whatever we have really at our disposal. How do you work with silence? How do you teach kids and people around you to be more comfortable with silence? Because you've shared the other day that you can go through these much longer experiences of couple days even of being in silence with yourself. What's the advice you give to the people who don't really have this practice and don't know where to start?
Well, you remember that we started that. There was a colleague in the commission that started the idea of the silence pose, and which I also introduced.
I hope to interview her one day as well. Yes.
So I introduced it in the building where I was working, and every Friday during lunchtime we had a time of silence and precisely explaining a bit, helping people to enter into silence, because indeed this is not something that is natural for many of us, that is sometimes uncomfortable to stay in silence. So yeah, you need patience, you need interest. It's really an adventure. I mean, staying in silence for a long period, but you also have some courage, because you will see things that are not comfortable necessarily, but you have to go there with this openness, this idea of open mind and interest and curiosity, and there's so much to learn.
Do you need structure? Do you need questions that you're inquiring into when you're in silence? Or is it really enough that somebody sits down on their cushion, they set their 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute alarm, and they wait to see what arises in them?
Well, no, there are plenty of podcasts, there are plenty of techniques, but I mean the easiest one is to focus on the breathing and on the sensations. It's really, you sit and you just observe and your sensation, and when you say observe a sensation, is experience the sensations and breathe. And the most tricky part is the relation with the thoughts, because the thought is what carries you away. So the way you will relate with the thought is really where you need a bit of skills, and that takes a bit of time, because in the beginning the thought take you completely, and after 5 minutes you realize the alarm ring. You will not stop that, but the way you will relate with that may be different. You will not feed it. You will not feed the internal conversation, and bit by bit you will gain freedom with your thoughts, and that's a huge freedom again, because you realize that you are not your thoughts, because we are so much identified with our thoughts.
This is a sentence I've often heard from many gurus. You are not your thoughts. Can you explain how you understand this?
You cannot explain that. You have to experience that. You by sitting on a cushion in silence. Well, but when I've just talked about fears, for instance, if you have all this fear, your mind tells you all bad things that can happen, and if you start believing all what your mind is telling you about the fears, you become your thoughts, and you are the fear. Or you have this freedom where you say, oops, I see all these mental, carousel, the things that are, but I'm not following it. I don't believe it. I simply don't believe it. And that's where you create this distance, and that can happen all the time in life, because all the time we are embarked in our thoughts. And all this time, and that's what you learn in meditation, is not to embark, not to log in the process. You let that go. But of course it's a training. And then you may have this moment of pure silence, and that is really an opening to another dimension, but that's not even the most useful. The most useful is creating this distance with your thoughts, and the breathing and the sensation are ways to bring you back home in you.
Yes.
And not in your thoughts.
Thank you very much. This interview took a bit longer than usual, but it was such a beautiful experience. I hope it was so enriching for those who are listening to us, that it was for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And all the best in your endeavors.
Yes, and all the best to you with this great idea of podcast.
Thank you for listening. For follow-up, you can find us on all major podcast platforms and all social media platforms, including our Instagram, Lights on Europe. So feel free to go there now and leave us your review, likes, feedback, as well as tips on who would you like to hear interviewed next time.